Hello, everyone who may be joining us. This is Celeste Fry from Public Works Partners. Welcome to the Nonprofit Tune-Up webinar. We will begin in 2 minutes. We're just going to give an extra minute or two for folks to dial in and join us. And as everyone is joining, though, please just take a moment to mute your microphone and turn off your camera. You should be able to see on your screen our screen. Excuse me. You should be able to see our screen, which says Public Works Partners presents the Nonprofit Tune-Up webinar. And if you cannot see that, or if you have something else on your screen, please use the chat window to send a message by going to the to box and clicking on it to choose to send something to just the host and presenter, Public Works Partners. So just as a reminder, please mute your microphone, whether you're on the phone or on your computer. Please turn off your video or your camera, all of which you can do right there in WebEx. And then throughout the webinar, if you would like to ask questions or give a comment, please type them into the chat window and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. If you will just choose in the menu of options, choose to submit your comment or question to Public Works Partners, the host. All right, great. So thank you so much again to everyone who is joining us. Let's get started. All right, so my name is Celeste Fry. I am the Principal and CEO of Public Works Partners, and I just want to welcome everyone one more time. If you are either on the phone or on your computer, please just take a moment to mute your microphone so that everyone can hear my voice clearly and not have background noise. All right, so welcome everyone. The goal of today's webinar is to learn about doing nonprofit assessments and to learn about the nonprofit tune-up tool that we have created and how it can help your nonprofit organization succeed. By the end of the webinar, listeners will learn about key challenges that nonprofits face and how periodic health assessments can help mitigate potential risks. You'll hear how we use our nonprofit tune-up tool to provide a SWOT analysis and strategic advice to community-based organizations, educational institutions, and philanthropies. And you'll also understand how we use the information we gather and how you may use it to benchmark your current work, identify areas for improvement, and capitalize on potential opportunities. The webinar will be broken down into 4 different sections. First, we'll do an introduction and we'll talk about nonprofit challenges. We'll talk about the common issues faced by nonprofits and how a health assessment can be beneficial. We will give an overview over the basics of the nonprofit tune-up tool, outlining the focus areas that we look at and the overall processes. Then we're going to dive deep into a case study for an opportunity to see what our tool really looks like in action and how the analysis is structured. We have created a fictional nonprofit to illustrate what that process is like. And then finally, we will have some time for Q&A and talk a little bit about kind of the outcomes and impacts of the tool and provide contact information. So without further ado, we are going to move into just a little bit about Public Works Partners. So if you are just joining us, my name is Celeste Fry. I am the CEO of Public Works Partners, and with me on the phone is Allison Quigney, who is our Director of Client Services. She will be taking us through the case study shortly. So Public Works Partners is a planning and consulting firm whose work strengthens the organizations that strengthen communities. We help our clients to launch and administer complex new programs, improve operations and increase impact, and promote organizational excellence. Our clients come to us because our team has a hands-on approach and expertise in both the nonprofit and public sectors, and that in turn allows us to design and implement customized solutions to complex problems that make the most sense for each organization we serve. We do happen to be a certified woman-owned business with a number of different public entities and also a disadvantaged business with the U.S. Department of Transportation. Some of the past clients that you'll see listed on here and current clients are the Roundabout Theater Company, LaGuardia Community College, Goodwill Industries of New York and New Jersey, and the Long Island City Partnership. We've worked with a number of organizations throughout the nonprofit and public sectors through about the 9 years that we have been in existence. So our role in working with clients is to help nonprofits deal with some of their most pressing and complex challenges. And in the course of working with these many clients over almost a decade, we've identified a set of common challenges that many nonprofits face. And we wanted to, and that's actually why we developed the Nonprofit Tune-Up, because we wanted to look for a really efficient and effective way for nonprofit organizations to look at their organization and their leadership and their finances to determine where they could make improvements. So just to talk through some of the potential challenges that nonprofits are facing, what we've identified as common challenges across many organizations are within the organization, there can be structural shortcomings in the organizational chart, gaps in terms of where different skills or types of staff are needed. There can be a lack of communication protocols across organizations, often especially if an organization starts small and then grows relatively quickly. They may not have all of those processes and protocols that are important to have in place. And finally, an incomplete development strategy. Many organizations are dependent on one type of funder, for example, government contracts or foundation grants, and don't always look at all the different types of fundraising that they could do, including from individuals, corporate philanthropy, things like earned revenue, things like that. So those are some of the organizational challenges that we have identified. In the area of leadership, we have often seen that organizations may have challenges around mission alignment over years or even decades of service. They may have services or programs that are not clearly connected to the core mission of the organization. There are sometimes issues where the board versus staff leadership have some lack of clarity between their roles and their responsibilities. And then we often also see that nonprofits can have challenges in terms of not having a strategy or a strategic plan in place. In the area of finance, we sometimes see that an organization's finances are misaligned with the organization's goals. For example, they may be investing significant resources into programmatic areas that are not aligned with their mission or with a new strategic plan, for example. They may have inefficient operations for lots of historic reasons, may have too many staff in some areas and then not enough staff in areas that are really growing or have a lot of potential, and may also have unclear budgeting practices. So these are all issues that we see often and look at. And then finally, all of these things genuinely contribute to the impact that a nonprofit is able to have and measure, which is incredibly important. So organizations sometimes have a lack of tools with which to measure their impact. They may have programs that, because of funding needs or because of a changes in how the organization's clients are needing services, may no longer be sustainable, or they may be missing opportunities to maximize their impact. These are a lot of the typical problems and challenges that we've seen. We'd be really interested in hearing if other folks, and by hearing I mean chatting, if other folks have other examples of challenges that their organization has or that they have seen in other organizations in these four crucial areas of impact, finance, leadership, and organization. So if you have something to add, another idea to add, or if you have a question to add, please go to your chat window and click on the to box, choose to submit it to Public Works Partners, and send us a message to add your thoughts to this, and we'll share those in the question and answer program. But we'd really like to get that feedback from folks. So in order to tackle these problems and challenges, it's really important to get to the root cause. What does a nonprofit need to know about itself in order to improve in these areas and in order to make progress? And what tools are at its disposal? This is another area, once we had identified that we felt that these types of challenges were common across many different types of nonprofits, we realized that there was not a standardized way to organize and think about and then tackle these challenges, which is why we've created the nonprofit assessment tool. We really created it with these questions in mind. So the nonprofit assessment, the nonprofit tune-up, is an online tool that we've created. It's available through our website at publicworkspartners.com, and it offers an affordable and comprehensive organizational analysis for nonprofits across those four areas that we outlined in the prior slide. We find that periodic health assessments can help mitigate potential risks. We have seen in organizations, particularly community-based organizations, but really any type, that it can be very hard to find resources, both financial and time and staff resources, to do this type of analysis, which is why we've worked on a way to do it very efficiently and affordably. The nonprofit tune-up takes in information gathered from a nonprofit and then provides an analysis of that information, including a SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which we'll talk about in greater detail in the case study. And also we provide strategic advice to community-based organizations through the nonprofit tune-up. We're able to benchmark a nonprofit who does the analysis against similar nonprofits who we have worked with, or through benchmarking tools that we have, we are able to identify areas for improvement, and we are able to capitalize on potential opportunities for the organization. We find it's especially important for community-based organizations, educational institutions, and foundations to do this type of periodic health assessment through a tool like the tune-up. A tune-up will reveal areas where any organization needs to focus, especially in those administrative and support areas that may not always be front and center to organizational leadership and boards. For example, for a community-based organization, an assessment can be a useful tool to you as you pursue grants, because it can help you to articulate your strengths, especially in areas like finance and organizational capacity that you may not have spent as much time really thinking through, and also help you to identify opportunities for growth and developing new capacity. It can also be incredibly helpful to a new executive director or leadership team to understand the organization in an efficient, rapid way, and to identify potential needs and minefields at times. Similarly, for an educational institution or really any large, complex organization, a tune up can be used in a few different ways. It can help leadership look across the entire organization, or it can even be used to drill down in one division or school in the case of an educational institution. For a foundation, for a philanthropic organization, we have found that an organizational assessment can be used to understand and improve the foundation's own internal processes, which, like any nonprofit, can sometimes move along without a lot of real thought or strategy over time, or it can also be used to identify capacity building needs for your grantees, and can be a very efficient way to provide that kind of assessment and service across a grantee portfolio. Each of these groups is providing critical funding and services to your clients, and an issue in your organization's health can impede you from successfully carrying out that mission. So, an internal assessment can facilitate a process of improvement within the organization. The graphic on this slide, it illustrates our own process at Public Works, which we call Process with Purpose, for conducting organizational improvement work and other projects that we do. But it also is actually a best practice for how you would use the findings from an organizational assessment to create change within your organization. The nonprofit tune-up tool fits into the assess portion of the at the top of this graphic. This tool allows us or you to efficiently assess the organization's objectives, the structure, the resources, and the constraints to gain a deeper understanding of the organization. And then in order to use this assessment for improving your organization and your practices, the next step would be to engage key stakeholders about the challenges and the opportunities that you have in front of you as an organization, to create solutions, generate ideas and solutions to meet your objectives that you've set, then implement those solutions that have come up, evaluate the results, and continually use those results to improve upon your previous work. And so we think of organizational work as a cycle that should constantly be focused on continuous improvement in your organization, and using tools like assessments and engagement with stakeholders to inform all the solutions that you develop. So within the assessment phase, what areas are important to be looking into when it comes to nonprofit organizations? Within our tune-up tool, we talked about that we look at 4 different areas: administrative, board, finance, and programs. And so I want to spend a moment to dig into each of those, and then we'll illustrate them. Allison will illustrate them in the case study coming up. So the organizational assessment should cover really these 4 key areas. First, administration, which is to look at the core operations of an organization: human resources practices, organizational structure, the partnerships that you have in both inside and outside your organization, and your development strategy. So this part of the assessment will gather information and kind of dig into all of those different areas, including your communications protocols, for example. In the area of the board, we look at three different areas. The board's engagement in fundraising, the board's role in governance of the organization, but also the structures of governance that the board operates within. There are laws in New York State and every other state that really govern how a board should operate. So we keep those things in mind, and also just best practices around board governance when looking at, for example, the size and composition of an organization's board and the fiduciary role that it does and should have with the organization. And then we also look at how the board is involved in setting strategy and direction for the organization and working with leadership to then see that that's implemented. Our financial assessment takes a deep look into the organization's financial statements. We then take information from those financial statements to do a ratio analysis. There are 9 general financial ratios, which are approved and used as generally accepted accounting practices. These ratios use information from the financial statements, and we then compare the results to best practices in the nonprofit sector. And this tool also includes some additional ratios that we could use if we wanted to take a deeper look into a specific area as part of the SWOT analysis. And then finally, an assessment should certainly look at your program and services portfolio. The portfolio analysis in our tune-up tool looks at how the programs are managed by the organizations. So less about the content of the programs and how they are managed. So we use as a framework, we use a tool called the Macmillan Matrix, which was developed by nonprofit experts to assess the financial feasibility and overall sustainability in terms of funding, need, and client availability for each program area within an organization. We look at mission alignment, economic viability, and also competitive positioning of programs vis-a-vis similar programs in other areas. Now, that was a lot of information. Please feel free to submit any questions or comments via the chat window, and I think also some of it will become more clear when it's illustrated by the case study. So before we dive into the case study of how one nonprofit actually went through this process, I just wanted to quickly outline how our nonprofit tune-up process actually works. So the client would submit an inquiry online through our website, publicworkspartners.com, and a member of our team will then reach out to the organization to explain the nonprofit tune-up, to discuss pricing and service levels, and to make sure it's the right fit for your organization. Then we send a link to the assessment, and you then complete. The assessment is done totally online from the nonprofit side, and it consists of answering questions and uploading some documents like your financial statements. Once you complete all of that information, we analyze the results. It's all totally confidential, and that's all offered through the agreement. And then we'll reach out to you if we have any clarification questions. But then we organize all of our findings into a summary report. We then share the summary report with you, and we come and meet with you in person to review our findings and talk about potential opportunities for improvement. The whole process takes 2 weeks or so from when you submit your online assessment to us. So with that, I am going to transfer over to Allison Quigney, who will talk through how one organization actually went through this process.
Thanks, Celeste. Hi, everyone. As Celeste said, now it's time to dig into a real world example. So, this is a fictional nonprofit who's really a composite of a lot of different experiences that we've had working with nonprofits over the time. So, we're going to talk about Oakdale Community Center. Oakdale Community Center is a mid-sized organization that has had consistent leadership for 30 years, but is going through a transition period. So the center wants to assess their operations, and they reached out to us to begin their nonprofit tune-up. Oakdale has a specific geographic focus and is a community center that serves all age ranges and offers a wide range of services. So as Celeste mentioned, before they really started the nonprofit tune-up, a member of our team reached out and talked to them about this process, and then they agreed. So now we're going to dig into the details and look under the hood of this organization. First things first, we want to get all of the data from Oakdale Community Center. So Oakdale was prompted to fill out the online assessment. They got a link from our team. And this online tool is comprised of about 60 questions that fall into a few categories: organizational structure and administration, program and services, board and governance, development and marketing, and budget and finance. We also asked Oakdale to tell us what they thought was going on in their organization. What did they think the greatest assets were, or the greatest challenges? Understanding the perspective of the organization helps us to, really put the answers on the tool into context and know what to focus on. And then we also asked them to upload some documents like their strategic plan, organizational charts, and financial statements. If all of this information is accessible, the tool can typically be completed in, about 1.5 to 2 hours. After we get all of the data, we then analyze it in those 4 areas that Celeste walked through. So let's talk about how this works for Oakdale. The first analysis area is the administrative one, where we're really looking at the core operations of the nonprofit. In this area, we ask things like, how many staff do you have? What does the organizational chart look like? Or the turnover rate? And also try to dig into things like if there's a succession plan for leadership or professional development opportunities. We also ask about internal communication strategies around, what does supervision look like? What does communicating team and organizational-wide policies and goals look like? And then what kinds of partnerships and development does an organization have? All of that helps us do a few things. It helps us to provide insight into how the organization can improve partnerships with external stakeholders, a huge part of all of your success. It helps us to consider the implications of current practices on staff morale, on growth, and on your team's longevity and sustainability. And it also helps us to identify opportunities to promote staff accountability for organizational goals. When we did this for Oakdale, we found some interesting things that really point to the fact that I think in every nonprofit, just like in any organization, there are a lot of really positive things happening and some things that are more challenging. So in this case with Oakdale, we found that out of a current staff of around 300 people, 150 people had left the organization in the past through a few years, which could really have some negative implications for morale of the people who are still on board and watching their teammates leave. On the other hand, Oakdale had a leadership and management succession plan and a pretty consistent process for doing annual reviews for staff, which, is very important in terms of helping staff understand where they fit in the overall organizational structure and what their next steps in their own career might. So that's what we focused on from an administrative standpoint. We then took all of the data and looked at what was going on with the board of directors. So the board assessment really identifies how an organization's board interacts with the organization as a whole, its mission, and its staff. This part of the assessment also outlines whether the board is fulfilling a lot of its core functions around fundraising, strategy development, and governance. So what do we ask in this case? Really, we ask for the basics to start. How many board members do you have? How frequently do they meet? What are their roles and responsibilities? We want to understand what decisions fall under the board's jurisdiction. I think, as you all know, some nonprofits have very active boards that are really involved in a lot of decision making, and some have more hands-off boards that really leave things to the executive director and leadership team. We try to get an understanding of that through this online tool. We also want to understand the board's involvement in fundraising and what the board's priorities are. It's very possible that this tool and doing an assessment might really come at the request of the board, and we want to understand what is the board trying to achieve, and is that the same thing that the leadership might be trying to achieve. All of this information honestly helps us to understand if the board is helping the organization to succeed. Is the board's structure supporting the mission of the organization and its sustainability? And is the board really fulfilling its responsibilities? In the case of Oakdale, yet again, there were real pros and a few challenges. We identified that the board was really quite a frequent participant and kind of actively engaged in the nonprofits. Day to day, they met monthly and checked in regularly with the executive director, really showing some alignment between the board and the leadership. They reviewed the finances every single month to really fulfilling those fiscal responsibilities. But interestingly, the board did not have a give-get benchmark for its members, which is one of those markers that can sometimes point to how involved a board is in fulfilling its development and kind of fundraising responsibilities. So after we looked at the board, we then dug into the finances a bit. As Celeste said, the financial assessment really looks a lot at financial statements. We assess the liquidity, the viability, and the sustainability of an organization based on those financial statements provided, and identify whether their current financial performance is positioning the organization to ultimately meet its mission. So this is where we ask you to upload several different documents, uploading the Form 990, any financial statements or audited financials. But then we really want to dig in a little bit more and understand how an organization is managing its finances. We ask about your fiscal goals for the year, and then try to understand how an organization is allocating money. Is there an endowment or reserve funding? Is money earmarked for investments in the organization? And we also want to understand what the processes are for managing financial operations or complying with grants and funding requirements. all of that information can help us to understand how the organization can use financial resources to achieve the organization's both short-term and long-term goals. You know, just like people, nonprofits, um, you know, can frequently be in good shape in the immediate, but potentially not in the long term. And this helps us to assess that and point to potential strategies for moving forward. Um, this process also helps us to review the organizational financial statements to identify, potential practices around becoming a more efficient operation or budgeting. Um, so for Oakdale, I think, in a very positive way, we found that each program budget is continuously reviewed by the organization to ensure that the target and programmatic goals are met without under or overspending. You can see this based on the fact that the board members were looking at the finances every month. Oakdale was an organization that was really focused on making sure that the finances were pretty consistently stable in the day-to-day operations. However, there were some challenges a bit more in the long term. The organization did not have an endowment or a reserve fund, and the net assets and unrestricted funds had decreased in the past year, which it raises a bit of a red flag, limits the ability of Oakdale to grow or expand if, the needs of their clients pointed to the desire to do so, or to respond if an unexpected situation occurred that they would need to, have some extra money on hand to deal with. So then after looking at finances, we look into the last analysis area, which is really the programs piece. So as Celeste said, for programs, we're really looking at a few things. We really want to understand how Oakdale's programs align with the organizational mission, and we employ a set of quantitative and qualitative tools to do so. The assessment also takes a look at the economic viability and the relative competitive advantages of OCC's programs. Oakdale is an example of an organization with a pretty vast set of services that they're offering. So we wanted to take a look and see, are all of those areas succeeding, and why or why not. So what do we ask in this case? The first thing we want to know is what areas the nonprofit is focusing on. Are there literacy programs? Are there early education programs, mental health, workforce development? Essentially, what services does the nonprofit offer? Then we want to understand, okay, well, what populations is the nonprofit serving? Is this a nonprofit that serves youth, that serves adults or senior citizens? Are they working with homeless or with people who are formerly incarcerated? As we all know, there's a variety of different populations that an organization could be working with. And that's one of the things that's really helpful to understand when thinking about the service portfolio. We also want to understand how the organization is assessing the success of each program. We actually ask you to fill out a metrics and programs worksheet where you identify the metrics that you are collecting, the definitions of those metrics, and how often you collect them. And then we want to understand how an organization is sharing program resources internally. So if there are similar programs, that could use similar resources? Are they communicating and doing that, or are they potentially operating in silos? Um, all of this information helps us to do a few things. One, it helps us to assess the connections between the programs and services offered by the organization and the organization's mission. This is really important because, um, as Celeste noted earlier, nonprofits, particularly those that have been around for a while, can often be working in areas that may fall a bit outside of their initial mission, or maybe going after grants that fall outside of their mission. Sometimes that can work out, but sometimes doing so can put a real strain on internal resources and on staff capacity, and can potentially diminish the effectiveness of their programs. I think we believe that healthy, strong nonprofits are constantly looking to improve what they do and innovate in their core areas. And one way to understand if that's happening is to look at the alignment between the organization's mission and the services they offer. This also helps us to evaluate programs according to metrics, and to understand, are an organization's programs meeting their goals? And then to identify existing partnerships and resources that could potentially increase the impact of the services that an organization is offering. When we looked at all of this for Oakdale, we learned, a few things. They were actually growing program services. They had 5 distinct programs and had grown to 8 very recently, which is the type of thing that, as I mentioned earlier, can be really exciting or present some, potential challenges. We learned that they have measurement processes in place for all of their programs, and were really able to quantify their impact, which is positive in terms of both being able to know if you're succeeding at your program services, and to be able to tell that story to potential funders. And we also were able to see that Oakdale was really working closely with its community. This was an organization that had a focus in a particular geographic area and had really been able to build coalitions in those areas, which really benefited its overall performance. So that's a run through of the 4 areas that we analyzed. And these 4 areas really are highly interconnected. In the online tool, we ask questions in distinct sections, but we really look at all of the answers to get a comprehensive understanding of the organization. And all of that information helps us to create the SWOT analysis. So a SWOT analysis, and you're looking at a sample version on the screen right now, really outlines an organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The strengths and weaknesses of an organization are really internal, and then the opportunities and threats are, what's coming externally and what's coming from outside of the organization. So we have identified here a sample of the SWOT that we created for Oakdale. So I've taken you through a lot of this, so I'll only highlight a few things, but I think we identified that the organization had some really good strengths. It had a diverse board that was really engaged. It met frequently as a board and with the executive director. And the organization had a strong community support and a good reputation that really helped it to be able to meet the needs of the communities it served. But there were also some weaknesses, the organization did not have a strategic plan, which can sometimes have a negative impact on both short-term and long-term decision making. And it also had experienced a high staff turnover rate, which could have some negative impact on staff morale and the organization's culture overall. So as you take a look at this deliverable, if you have any reactions to these results or how we arrived at these conclusions, we'd love to hear them. Please feel free to type your answers into the comment box, and we'll take a look at the end. But this one-page SWOT analysis isn't the only thing organizations get when they receive a nonprofit tune-up. Oakdale and any organization would also receive a SWOT for each of the 4 analysis areas. So as you can see on the left, we have a detailed SWOT analysis for administration, and each organization would also receive one for the board, for finances, and for programs that go into more detail than what you'll see kind of on that summary SWOT that we showed on the previous page. We also include in our final report a summary with some key takeaways and conclusions, and then really have an in-person conversation with the client about potential opportunities and next steps for moving forward based on what we've identified in the tune-up. So how can you use these outputs? There are a variety of ways, many which Celeste mentioned earlier, but sometimes this is a really good foundation before a nonprofit creates its own strategic plan. It can be very helpful to understand, where do you stand right now? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? And where could you be going before starting to chart that course and thinking about the future direction of a nonprofit? It can help a nonprofit to begin to, tackle identified challenges, to begin to prioritize next steps, and also potentially to really identify opportunities that you could then use to write a grant proposal and ultimately, raise some more funding in order to be able to continue to offer your services. So this slide is a summary of everything that you'll get from the nonprofit tune-up. And what we talked through today is the springboard assessment of the tune-up. This is a baseline assessment. So it is the online tool, the analysis that we walked you through, and then an in-person meeting to discuss the analysis and potential recommendations for where you could go next. It is best for organizations that need a real quick report on their organization's health and want something really efficient and affordable. That analysis costs $5,000, but then there are additional pricing levels for more intense engagements where we would work, more directly with your staff, have more conversations with your team, and build out a more concrete set of recommendations. And any work that we did that was a larger follow-up work, the cost of the springboard assessment of $5,000 would be deducted from that larger version. We can certainly talk through any the more comprehensive versions in depth via kind of individual phone conversations. And we're happy to work with you to figure out what best suits your needs. So thank you for kind of listening to all of us and sitting here while we walked through this process. On this slide right now, we have some contact information. If you are interested in accessing the nonprofit tune-up, you can email the email address on the screen, nptuneup@publicworkspartners.com, and someone from our team will get back to you. But we have about 10 minutes left, and can use this time to discuss any questions. If you would like to add any comments you might have, feel free to put those into the chat box, and we'll be happy to respond.
All right, we are, this is Celeste Fry again. We're now on speakerphone, so there might be a tiny bit of an echo, but Alice and I both wanted to be able to discuss any questions or comments that have come in. We have had a couple, so I'll jump in. So first is we had a couple people who added some challenges, some nonprofit challenges from when I was discussing some of the challenges that we have seen for nonprofit organizations, and these are both particularly good. One is external challenges, especially rapidly evolving trends in philanthropy and funder priorities. That is absolutely right. I think it is it can be a tough one to look at for organizational assessment because that's an external threat. Although I do think it is something when you're looking at financial sustainability and kind of program viability, that would be an important and valid issue to consider whether your programs are actually aligned to the current or future priorities of your funders, or whether you need to potentially pursue opportunities with new funders. Allison, anything you would add to that? Great. So then we had another challenge that was submitted, which is building staff capacity around technological innovation and also policy changes in the industry you're working in. And I think that's also an excellent one. Thinking of professional development and whether an organization has professional development kind of available to build staff capacity is definitely something that we look at. This tune-up doesn't currently really dig into technology issues because most of us could spend a long time talking about IT for nonprofit organizations that you have to deal with. So I think that's a good point, and one we may want to consider for sure. But I think we definitely do look at professional development because it is something, unfortunately, that sometimes gets left behind when nonprofits have constrained resources and they really want to invest everything they have in client services without always quite realizing that one of the best ways to retain staff and honestly have staff provide better services to clients is by that kind of making those professional development investments. So thank you for both of those, for all of that feedback. So apologies if we are sounding a little unclear at getting to the phone. So then we have another question that has come in asking about whether we could make available a more detailed SWOT analysis for the other areas. And I think that is something that we could look into as a follow-up to all of you. So as long as we have your contact information from when you registered for the webinar, which I do believe we do, we can send along some additional follow-up information from that SWOT analysis. All right. Does anyone else have another question they would like to submit? Oh, all right. Thank you. You can always contact us through nptuneup@publicworkspartners.com. Or you can also find direct contact information for myself and for Allison Quigney also through our website. We also would invite you to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and LinkedIn at Public Works IQ, which is the tag we try to always use. We try to share a lot of content there as well. And thank you so much for joining us. We have really enjoyed doing this webinar. Please share any feedback you have or additional questions afterwards, and we look forward to hearing from many of you. All right, thanks. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.